Hello there, fellow cultists. This is DM Nell, and I'm back with another episode of Shadow the Demon Lord Talk. This is episode number 91, and today I'll be talking about, I'm continuing my series on the comparison between Shadow the Demon Lord and Dungeons and Dragons. And again, as I've mentioned in my other videos, this is being prompted by the announcement that there's going to be a new edition of D&D, or there's going to be a one edition of D&D coming out in 2024. And as a result of that, as many of us who have been around for many of these edition changes, that is a prime time for people to start looking at all the options that they have available to them out there as far as games go, because people don't always want to switch editions. They might be happy with 5e, they may be getting tired of 5e, and then the announcement that all the books that you bought for 5e are all of a sudden going to be, now replaced by the one D&D books. It puts a lot of people off, so they start looking around. They don't necessarily want to invest in the new D&D, so they start looking around, and that's what my series is for. In the event that they happen to look around in this direction, where Shadow the Demon Lord is, I want them to have some information about it. And there's not a whole lot of information out there to be had about Shadow the Demon Lord other than buying the books and supplements and educating yourself, which, a lot of people don't like to do that. So my videos try to educate people on the game so that they will be informed if they want to buy into it and switch over. So this particular video is comparing Shadow the Demon Lord to D&D's magic system. And this is a pretty complex topic. I've already talked about magic in another video early on, but I never really compared the two feature for feature. And I'm going to do that here. Now, I can't go into all the details, obviously, because that would take too long, but I do want to give you a high level so that you understand what the differences are. And there's really more similarities than there are differences, but there are enough differences that it warrants a video to explain them. So, first of all, with the D&D magic system, and if you're watching this video because you're wanting to inform yourself about Shadow the Demon Lord, then my assumption is that you know your D&D stuff, and you're wanting to understand how it compares to Shadow the Demon Lord. So with that basic assumption, I assume that if you're watching this, you know the D&D magic system for the most part. So as you know, in D&D you have schools of magic. So that would be everything from alteration to evocation to illusion to necromancy, all the different schools of magic. And really, besides a few things that, that are designed to play off of that, the school of magic really doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in D&D. Now and let me explain that, because people are going to be like, you're wrong. The wizards pick a thing at third level, and that is true. Wizards do pick a specialization at third level, and they pick a school of magic that they want to specialize in. So if they're going to be an evocation specialist, then they get stuff for that. If they get, if they choose another specialty, then they get stuff for that. But that's really about it. I mean, as far as the game goes, it doesn't really, the school of magic doesn't really affect gameplay all that much, other than just to kind of give some kind of logical explanation as to why that type of magic exists. It kind of bundles similar types of magic into little packages, but you don't really do anything with the packages. Shadow the Demon Lord has something similar, but instead of calling it schools of magic, they call them traditions. And the traditions are, very varied. And there's like 42 or so, I think, traditions. And they go from arcana, to battle magic, to curse magic, to divination, necromancy, destruction magic, earth magic, primal magic, song magic, water magic. There's just a ton of different traditions that you can learn in Shadow of the Demon Lord. Now, the differences between these two is significant, because whereas there are schools of magic in D&D and traditions in Shadow of the Demon Lord, in Shadow of the Demon Lord, you actually have to learn a tradition in order to be able to learn the spells under it. So in D&D, you just, if you want an evocation spell like Fireball, you just pick it and you can cast it. You don't have to understand how all evocation magic works. You just pick the spell that you like and you go with it. In Shadow of the Demon Lord, you actually have to learn traditions. And by learning a tradition, you are able to choose spells from the spell list in that tradition. So if I want to learn Arcana spells, I have to learn the tradition for Arcana. And then by learning the tradition for Arcana, that enables me to pick any of the spells, such as Arcane Armor, Magic Dart, Arcane Shield, and so on and so forth. The process of learning the tradition is basically outlined when you choose your path. And if it's a spellcasting path, then it tells you how you learn your tradition. So basically, like at first level, if you're a wizard, you learn 2 traditions. And then by learning those 2 traditions, you automatically get a 0 level spell. Now, a 0 level spell in Shadow of the Demon Lord is somewhat equivalent to a cantrip in D&D. And it's not 0 level spell. I correct myself. In Shadow of the Demon Lord, spells are labeled by rank. So there's a rank 0 spell, there's a rank 1 spell, there are rank 0 spells, rank 1 spells, rank 2 spells, and so on. Shadow of the Demon Lord, they have spell levels. So you got cantrips, then you got first level spells, second level spells, and so forth. So what I like about Shadow of the Demon Lord, excuse me, what I like about Shadow of the Demon Lord is that you don't confuse, got something in there, you don't confuse your path levels or your character levels with spell levels, because they call them ranks. And that's one thing that pisses me off about D&D. It always has. There are 3rd level spells. You would think at 3rd level you would be able to pick 3rd level spells, but it doesn't work that way. You have to be 5th level to pick a 3rd level spell. So I've always thought that the terminology in D&D needed to be revised, or the magic system needed to be revised so that a spell level is equivalent to a class level. But it's not. Maybe one D&D will change that, but we'll see. But anyway, in Shadow of the Demon Lord, the rank of the spell has nothing to do with the level of the character. It's just the rank. The rank just tells you the power level of the spell, basically. So, as I was saying, you have to learn the tradition, and by learning the tradition, you automatically get a rank 0 spell, which is equivalent to a cantrip. So, a rank 0 spell for the Arcana tradition, an example would be Arcane Armor, where you get +2 bonus to your defense. So that's kind of similar to a spell in D&D. And you're going to see a lot of similarities between some of the spells in Shadow of the Demon Lord versus some of the spells in D&D, because magic is pre-packaged magical effects. And the ones in D&D have been tried and true for 40 years, almost 50 years. And so, to reinvent the wheel for the game is not really practical. Plus, people like Fireball. People like Magic Missile. And so to have an equivalent in your new fantasy game that you're developing would be smart, because people like those spells. And so there are equivalents to those. Magic Dart is kind of a weak equivalent to Magic Missile. Unerring Darts is more of a similar, more equal comparison to Magic Missile. And then, of course, you got it, it powers up from there. You got explosive darts. Um, and I think that's it as far as the darts go. But anyway, so that's just for the Arcana tradition. Now, Shadow of the Demon Lord has, like I said, 40 some odd traditions, and each tradition is focused on a particular thing. So battle magic enhances your battle prowess and gives you battle abilities in combat. Conjuration obviously allows you to conjure things. Curse magic imposes curses and curse-like effects on other creatures. Divination is what you would imagine it to be. Enchantment is what you would imagine it to be. And then we have things that are pretty unique to Shadow of the Demon Lord. These are the dark magic traditions. And the dark magic traditions are basically things that are forbidden to learn. Magic isn't by any means common in Shadow of the Demon Lord, but for those who practice it, there's the traditional magical learnings that you get that are accepted by the magical community. And then there's the dark magic traditions, which are shunned by most right-thinking people. And the dark magic traditions are, a lot more morally ambiguous, if not downright evil. So you have the curse tradition is a dark magic tradition. Necromancy is a dark magic tradition. For the forbidden tradition is a dark magic tradition. I believe those are the only three in the core rules. There are more that are introduced in other supplements, but in the core rule book, those are the primary three. So dark magic traditions have special requirements and rules that go along with them. So, for example, if you're casting or if you're learning the forbidden tradition, then you risk getting corruption. If you are learning curse spells, then there are special rules around that. I'm not going to go into each of these. If you're interested, you can buy the book and read up on them yourself. But the cool thing about these is that these forbidden traditions have some really raunchy, brutal spells. And to have access to those, you have to kind of pay a price. That price may be in the form of, you have to make a sacrifice in order to be able to get your spell back after you cast it, or something along those lines. So, dark magic traditions, definitely have a cost associated with them. Some other traditions, such as the destruction tradition, gives you power, but it also can damage you in the process of casting it. So, for example, if you cast a destruction spell, let me just grab one here real quick, if I can find it. All right, so destruction spells such as Sunder. So the target for Sunder is one object made from glass, metal, or stone that you can see within medium range. You cast a spell, and just the process of casting a spell causes the caster to take 2 points of damage. The target, which is again an object made from glass, metal, or stone, takes 3d6 points of damage. There's no saving throw. There's no need to target, or there's no roll to be made. It just happens. So by it being that simple to damage that thing, the cost involved is that you have to take 2 points of damage for that to happen. So that is, I love the destruction tradition. I just imagine that the people that take this tradition, they just look all kinds of fucked up after they've had a few levels worth of using this magic. And, by the time they're like 5th or 6th level using destruction magic, they just got scars all over them. They're just like, their fingers are all bent with arthritis because they've been broken so many times. It's just, they just look horrible. That's just what I imagine. It doesn't say that anywhere in here, but that is That is, well, actually, it does say it. It says the cost of this mastery is revealed in many bruises and injuries afflicting their bodies. So yeah, there you go. It says it right there in the tradition. See some other things. So let me talk about curse for a minute because it's kind of cool. Curse magic often taught by hags and corrupted witches spread misfortune and woe, stripping away a victim's vitality, courage, and even form. And one of the things you can do, which I think is kind of cool, is control. You can make control dolls to control things. So, basically it's like a voodoo doll. I love that. There's also some of the spells are kind of cool, like swine. You can turn a creature into a pig. That happened in my last game. One of my players has the curse tradition and turning it. You can actually target 3 creatures with that spell, and they have to make a strength challenge roll, which is kind of similar to a saving throw, but I'll talk about that more in a little bit. And if they fail, then they turn into pigs, and they scurry away because they're frightened. Then the next thing up from that is toad. You can turn a creature into a toad. So this is like what you would see in movies depicting different curses, which I love. Let's see some of the other type of spells. Earth spells have to do with earth magic, as you might presume. Enchantment spells have to do with charms and basically commanding people, compelling people, dominating them, that sort of thing. Fire magic is pretty self-explanatory. And then you got the forbidden tradition. Darkest of the dark arts. Forbidden spells produce horrid and unspeakable effects. Most societies outlaw the use of such magic. Inquisitors and witch hunters alike scour the countryside for its wielders, consigning any they capture to the purifying flames along with all of their implements and writings. Yet somehow the vile tradition persists and new users appear all over the world in greater and greater numbers. So this is the type of magic that demons use, devils use, hags use, just truly evil, vile creatures use the forbidden tradition. And the reason for that is because you can do such things as probably the poster child for this game and its magic system is this one particular spell called Hateful Defecation. And basically what this means is that if the target of the spell is a living creature, and if they are weak enough and if they roll poorly enough, when actually they don't have to. No, it's just that they're weak enough, and if your attack roll against their strength is high enough, then it causes them to essentially shit themselves to death. They take damage as they expel things violently from their body through their ass, and if their health is a certain point, 10 or less, then they die as they just expel everything, including organs and blood, and everything just comes pouring out of their ass, and they die horribly. Otherwise, they just take damage as they violently expel this excrement from their bodies. And so this is kind of like the signature spell for Shadow of the Demon Lord, and it is a wonderfully horrid spell. But there are others. You can have maggots fill a target's belly. You can have the target's eyes explode from their head. You can have their genitalia shrivel up and fall off. You can have their skeleton basically trying to rip itself out of the creature's body. You can have you can force 2 creatures' bodies to horridly join together in this conglomerated massive creature, which is just awful. And these are all forbidden magic in the forbidden tradition. So, and you can see right here, this is an example of the different spells happening here. So, this is the maggots. This is the parting bone from flesh. Skeleton is ripping out of the body. And then you got the hateful defecation expelling out of this poor guy's ass over here. So, yeah, awesome spells in the forbidden tradition, but yeah, it's forbidden. So this is the one where the cost for relearning the spell after you've cast them is that you have to sacrifice a creature to the dark powers to regain your expended castings of your forbidden spells. We'll talk about castings here in a moment. So anyway, that's forbidden tradition. So that is the difference between the D&D Schools of Magic and the Shadow of the Demon Lord traditions. The traditions, actually, you have to learn the tradition to learn the spells in there. You can only learn traditions as your paths allow you to learn traditions, and then you choose spells from those traditions as your path dictates. So some paths allow you to learn one or two spells, or learn new traditions, or both. Just depends on what level you're at and which path you're taking. Okay, so then there are spell slots versus casting. So this is actually how you cast your spell. In D&D, you have spell slots. So at every level, you have a certain number of spell slots, and you can use those spell slots to cast your spells. It's fairly simple. Some people like it, some people don't. But that's a system that's been used essentially since 3rd edition now, I think. Then in Shadow of the Demon Lord, you have something similar. It's called castings, but castings are where it differs from spell slots is that castings are tied to the spells that you learn. So for each spell that you have a certain number of castings for that spell. So you may have the disguise spell, which is a rank 0 spell, and you may have 2 castings of that spell at first level, which means that you can cast it twice before you have to take a rest to regain your castings for that spell. And as you increase in level, you get more castings per spell. So the you don't use your castings for your disguise spell if you're going to cast a vertigo spell. So like I said, the castings are specific to the spell. So if you never cast a disguise spell, or if you never cast a figment spell, then you don't expend any of the castings for those spells. You only expend the castings for the spells that you actually cast. So that's the magic tradition, or that is the casting system for Shadow of the Demon Lord. And I have to be brutally honest with you, it's not my favorite. It's very gamey. It's hard for me to wrap my head around how that would play out in like a novel. It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense that your castings are linked to your spell. So you can have 10 spells. Each spell has its own bucket of castings. And, I just don't get it. Spell slots make more sense to me, because you have a finite amount of ability to cast things, and as you cast spells, you use up your spell slots, and then boom, when you're done with spell slots, you're done with casting spells. And I really don't even love that. I've actually lately been looking at different magic systems in different RPGs, such as Dungeon Crawl Classics, and I'm really more in favor of a magic system where you have to roll to see if you can even cast your spell. And then if you cast it, then, the magical effect happens, or, you may have to do additional things beyond that, but you actually have to succeed on a casting check in order to see if the spell goes off. And in addition to that, you don't have any limitation on how many times you can cast a spell. But if you do a critical failure on a casting, then bad things happen to you. and potentially to the people around you. So, that's the cost in that type of system. And I would much rather have had that type of system in both D&D and Shadow of the Demon Lord rather than this limited spell slots castings mechanic. Now, some people like these because spells go off automatically. They don't have to check to see if the spell works. The spell happens. They may still have to roll to hit, or they may still have a saving throw in D&D or a challenge roll in Shadow of the Demon Lord, but at least the spell goes off and something happens. Whereas in Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you fail your casting check, then nothing happens and you basically wasted your action. But it's a trade-off. So to each their own. There are options. Options are good. And so I would say that the best game that is yet to be created, in my opinion, would have a variety of different magic systems that you could choose from in order to customize your arcane character or your divine character or whatever to the type of magic system that you prefer. So anyway, if any of you enterprising people out there want to come up with something like that, that'd be great. So back on topic here. That is the spell slot versus casting system, D&D versus Shadow of the Demon Lord. Now, what's next? Okay, so I already talked about this a little bit, but I'll just reiterate it. In D&D, you got spell lists. Spell lists are spell packages, essentially, that you choose from based on your class. So if you're a wizard, you have a wizard spell list, and you can only choose spells from that spell list. If you are a bard, you can only choose spells from your bard spell list. If you are a warlock, you can only choose spells from your warlock spell list. I think that's changing in 1D&D or D&D 1 or whatever it's called. But anyway, that's how it is in 5th edition right now. And it has been for, I think, the last couple of editions. And then, of course, I already talked about the tradition version in Shadow of the Demon Lord, in which you learn the tradition and then you can pick the spells from that tradition. So you can learn any tradition that you want in Shadow of the Demon Lord. You can learn Forbidden, you can learn Fire, you can learn Enchantment, you can learn Water and Teleportation and Telepathy. You can learn all these different traditions whenever you have an option to learn a new tradition, and then you can pick any spells from those traditions. Whereas in D&D, if you want to choose a healing spell and you're a wizard, you're shit out of luck because there are no healing spells in the wizard spell list. So you're limited in D&D. You're limited by the class that you choose on which spells that you can take. Now, of course, the way around that is by multiclassing. You can multiclass and then you have the spell list opened up to you for the class that you took you multiclassed into. But as I mentioned in my last video, multiclassing is built into Shadow of the Demon Lord, so you don't have to multiclass in order to pick up healing spells if you want to be mostly a wizard type character. Wizards can pick the life tradition, which has all the healing spells in it. So that's a pretty significant difference between how you are able to choose what spells you want in both systems. One thing that D&D has that Shadow of the Demon Lord does not have in its core rules is ritual casting. So some spells in D&D has a ritual tag, which means that you can cast a spell as a ritual, and it takes longer to cast a spell, but by doing so, you don't use up a spell slot. So you may take 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour or whatever to cast a particular spell that has a ritual tag on it, and at the end of it you still have all your spell slots because you used a ritual to cast that spell rather than using up one of your spell slots, which presumably is your own personal magical energy store that enables you to cast spells. So that's one thing that Shadow of the Demon Lord does not have. You use your castings or you don't cast a spell. So that's the thing. So I talked a little bit about this next thing somewhat. In D&D, if you cast a spell, there are some spells that require a 2-hit roll. like I believe Firebolt, you have to roll to hit. And then there are some spells that you just cast it and the target has to make a saving throw. So it automatically affects the target if that target fails their save. If that target doesn't fail their save, then maybe they take half damage, or maybe it doesn't affect them at all. But you know, in D&D, it's basically that. You either have to, when you cast a spell, you either have to make an attack roll against the target's defense, or the target has to make a saving throw to resist the spell. So in Shadow of the Demon Lord, it's a little bit different. Pretty much every spell that is like an attack spell targets a defense. And pretty sure I talked about this a little bit in the last one of my last videos. In Shadow of the Demon Lord, the target's defense is their ability score. So if you are targeting, let's see if I can find a spell here that I think I had one earlier, but let's just see. Let's use Hateful Defecation. All right, so if you want to cast Hateful Defecation, it has to be a living creature with a physical body. So in doing so, the target's guts twist and rumble noisily. If the target's health is 10 or less, it dies instantly, streams of blood and feces gushing from its orifices. So there, that part of the spell specifies a requirement for the target's health to be 10 or less. And if it is, there's no saving throw, there's no attack roll. It just happens. The target dies because everything comes gushing out of its ass. However, if the health of the target is higher than 10, then you have to make an intellect attack roll versus the target's strength. So if the target's strength is like, if you're doing this attack against a Minotaur who has like an 18 strength, then you have to make your intellect attack roll, which means you roll d20, you add your intellect modifier, and you compare that result against the target's strength score. Let's say it's a Minotaur that has like an 18 strength. I don't know if a Minotaur has an 18 strength, but let's just presume that it does. You have to roll 18 or better in order to affect that target with this spell. Once you affect the target with that spell, on a success, the target takes a d6 plus 2 damage and becomes dazed for 1 round as its guts violently and spectacularly expel their contents. If this damage incapacitates the target, excrement, organs, and blood explodes from the body, which instantly brings about its death. Now, incapacitation means that the creature's damage score equals its health score. So if you have a health of 40 and you've taken 40 points of damage by the time that you cast a spell, then you become incapacitated, in which case this part here comes into play. Excrement, organs, and blood explodes from its body and instantly brings about its death. So if you're smart using this spell, you're timing it so that you're either targeting weak things or you're targeting a creature that's taking a lot of damage. And hopefully by casting this spell, you put that over the top, incapacitate the creature, and by that point it dies from shitting itself to death. And then, of course, another thing in Shadow of the Demon Lord that I don't think I mentioned is when you cast the spell that has an attack roll associated with it, and this one did, then if you roll 20 or higher, the target takes extra damage for this particular spell. But the rolling 20 or higher, and then there's also another requirement that goes with that, which is you have to defeat the target's defense by 5 or better. So just rolling 20 or higher isn't good enough. It also has to, your end result has to be at least 5 points higher than the target's defense. So if the creature has a defense of 19 and you roll a 22, you don't get the added effect of the attack roll plus 20 plus because you didn't defeat the thing's defense by 5 or better. So that's another thing that differs in Shadow of the Demon Lord. You don't really have a critical success in Shadow of the Demon Lord like you do in D&D when you roll a natural 20. Okay, so that is the that's the difference between when you cast a spell in D&D and how it affects the targets versus Shadow of the Demon Lord. And I talked about challenge rolls before. A challenge roll essentially is always the target number is always 10, and you have to get 10 or better in order to succeed on any challenge roll. And to make a challenge roll more difficult or easier, the DM would apply boons or banes to that roll. So, your target number may never change, but if I saddle you with, 3 banes, then the chances that you're going to roll a 6 and have to apply a 6 to your attack roll is pretty significant, which could take you down below 10. I hope that made sense. I'm just kind of rambling here. So, anyway, that is the difference between saving throws and the Shadow of the Demon Lord system. So that is the spell casting mechanic around. I don't know why I'm doing this with my hands, but that is the I guess I'm casting a spell. That is a spell. That is the magic tradition or the magic systems for D&D versus Shadow of the Demon Lord. Now, I also wanted to take a moment to talk about magic as it applies to magical items that your characters might pick up throughout the course of their adventure and career. Now, magic items in D&D are legendary, basically. Everybody knows, gauntlets of ogre power. Everybody's familiar with bracers of defense. Everybody's familiar with rings of invisibility. These are tropes that were essentially, popularized by D&D. The Ring of Invisibility came with the Lord of the Rings first. Yes, I get that, but popularized mostly around games like D&D. +1, +2, +3 weapons. Those things are a staple of D&D. Staff of Power, Staff of the Magi, Rod of Lordly Might, Armor of whatever. Can't think of an armor type right off the top of my head. But anyway, you get my drift. Magic items are basically famous in D&D because as you adventure, you accumulate magic items. And it seems like there's like a factory churning out magic items in the world, similar magic items. So there's like a formula for making rings of protection. There's a formula for making staffs of power. There's a formula for making, the various rod, staffs, and wands and wondrous items. And that's why in various dungeons you may find similar items, such that you have different characters that, you may have 2 different characters that both have rings of protection or, cloaks of the, or capes of the mountebank, or however you say that. So, D&D doesn't limit the availability of these things other than by its rarity system. So, the rarity, determines, at what point during a career the DM should be making these items available. So you got, common items all the way up to very rare items. So you should, very rare items, you should never find a very rare item in a first level adventure, right? But you may find a very rare item in a 10th level adventure or a 15th level adventure. So that's how it's handled in D&D. Shadow of the Demon Lord handles magic items differently. So Shadow of the Demon Lord, the whole concept around Shadow of the Demon Lord's game system is that your character doesn't need any magic items, and if truth be told, the same thing applies to D&D. Your character in D&D should not have to have a magic item in order to be effective. What it acquires throughout the course of its, what your character acquires throughout the course of its career leveling up in powers and abilities should be significant. What's the word I'm looking for? Should be enough to allow them to handle whatever threats are thrown at them. Now, but people like their loot. People love stuff, getting stuff, killing monsters, getting their stuff has always been a part of D&D. And, just that's why people scour dungeons. They're looking for loot. And that's why, these magic items have become so famous over the years, because of the fact that players and characters enjoy accumulating magic items. And, and they kind of customize their character around the types of magic items that they acquire. So, if you have a dwarf, what dwarf doesn't want a dwarven thrower, right? Or a hammer of thunderbolts, along with a girdle of giant strength. These are things that characters want to accumulate and, become that archetype of the dwarf with the belt of giant strength, wielding the hammer of thunderbolts, or, whatever. And, just waiting in the battle, killing giants left and right. I mean, that's just awesome, right? Every character that I've ever developed as a dwarven character, that's what I picture at 20th level. I want that shit. But you don't need it in order to be effective at 20th level. You could be a 20th level character with no magic items and still be able to hold your own against whatever threat is thrown at you, supposedly. Now, I would say, I would call bullshit on that, because, there's a lot of monsters with magic resistance, so you need magic weapons in order to be able to defeat that. And it's assumed that by 20th level or, higher levels, that at least some of your characters have accumulated some magic items to be able to defeat these creatures that have that type of resistance. So again, they say you shouldn't have to have magic items, but at the same time, you kind of have to have magic items by the time you're in the high levels. Shadow of the Demon Lord is the same way, in that it assumes that you don't need magic in order to be effective. But I think it's more true in Shadow of the Demon Lord than it is in D&D. You truly don't need magic items, and really magic items are not a thing in Shadow of the Demon Lord. Enchanted items are a thing in Shadow of the Demon Lord, but enchanted items are not factory made. They are not churned out in mass quantities. Here's the 2022 line of +1 magic swords. That doesn't happen in Shadow of the Demon Lord. Every magic item is unique, and there are tables that you roll on when you want to create an enchanted item to include in your adventure as treasure. And the enchanted item, is everything is randomized. Now, of course, as a DM, you can go in, you can choose to create an enchanted object from these without rolling. But there's, where's the fun in that? It's much more fun to just create a batshit crazy enchanted object that the characters find in an adventure and have no idea what to do with it, because, who would make such a damn thing? But that's the point. Magic items are created for specific purposes in Shadow of the Demon Lord by specific people that had a specific need. Who the hell knows what their need was? If somebody created a wagon that shoots lightning bolts, they had a need for that for some reason. Or if they have a doll that tells you that there are demons within a certain area. Somebody had a need for that, so they created an object that does that for them. So that is how magic items work in Shadow of the Demon Lord. You actually have to randomly, or should be randomly, determining what form the object takes, and then what enchantment has been placed on that object. So the enchanted object table here has the different forms that an object can take, such as light armor, melee weapon, jewelry, furniture. Yeah, you can have an enchanted chair, or an enchanted mirror, or an enchanted rug. Sculpture, not scripture. Sculpture, like a statuette or an idol. A coin, you can have enchanted coins. Tools, so you have an enchanted hammer, or you have an enchanted set of scales, or a wrench. Clothing, instrument, container, inscription, such as a tome, scroll, clay tablet, an implement, technology, such as a pocket watch or pistol, a game, such as cards, or a toy, such as a doll, accessories like a key or a monocle or a scabbard, and, religious things, a vehicle, weird items like mummified hand or a bezor, ranged weapon, or medium heavy armor. So these are the forms that the enchanted object takes. So you roll a d20, you determine what form you want your item to take. So for example, I would say that I want to put an enchanted item in this adventure that I am, just a random enchanted item that I'm creating. So I roll a 13, and that is going to be a piece of technology. So I choose what type of technology. I could say it's a pocket watch, or I could say it's a pistol. I could say it is an appropriate piece of technology for the campaign setting. So I could say that would be a forge, or I could say that would be an enchanted wheel on a ship. Whatever piece of technology that you want to come up with that's appropriate to your campaign, that is what the characters would find. And then I would roll on the enchanted object table. So I roll another d20 to determine which table I roll on, and I rolled a 1. So that would be table 1, which is right here. And then I roll another d20 to determine what the enchantment is. And this time I rolled an 11. So the enchantment on this technology item is that when you attempt to climb, you make the strength challenge roll with 1 boon. Okay, so let's say that the magic item that I chose was this wheel on a ship. So apparently the person that commissioned this item to be enchanted wanted the people on their ship to be able to climb the masts easier than you can otherwise. So that's why they created this. So when anybody on the ship climbs the masts or climbs anything on the ship, they do so with 1 boon. All right. So, that's weird, but okay. That's the magic item that they found. It's a wheel on a ship. Now they could actually remove the wheel and carry it around with them, and then if they make any attempts to climb things, they would have that same boon because the enchantment is on the wheel itself. But you get the idea. So let's do another one. So let's just say, I rolled a 20 that time. So this is medium and heavy armor. So then I roll to see what table it's on, and it's on table 3 this time. So I go to table 3 and roll a d20 again, and this time I get a 4. So my heavy or medium armor has this enchantment. You can use an action to cause fog to spread out 10 yards around the object. The fog remains for 1 minute or until dispersed by wind and partially obscures its area. The object has 3 uses. So somebody commissioned this armor to be created so that it can emanate fog out to 10 yards around the person wearing it. That's actually pretty cool. I could throw that in my next adventure. That's actually pretty useful. So anyway, that is how magic items work in Shadow of the Demon Lord versus D&D. Much more random, much more likely to get something just totally off the wall. And it's up to your characters and your players to figure out what to do with them, if they want to use them, how to use them, and that sort of thing. Just quick story. In one of my campaigns, I had given out a pocket watch that had the power to leap forward in time by I think, a certain number of minutes or a certain number of rounds or something like that. I forget what the actual enchantment was, but it was something that the character had not used. When they found it, they just couldn't really think of a reason to use this. It really didn't come into play until the players were faced with a scenario that was a TPK scenario. Basically, they were in an airship. The airship had been attacked by a giant monster and damaged, so the airship was plummeting to the ground, thousands of feet. And basically, everybody was going to die. But what this character did was, a split second before that airship hit the ground, he used this item to move himself forward in time by whatever it was, a minute or number of rounds or whatever. So by doing that, he avoided the airship crash and just appeared on the ground somewhere. I could have said that he appeared at terminal velocity and still would have taken damage from that, but I wasn't that big of a dick. But so he appeared somewhere in the vicinity of the crash of the airship, and he survived it. And he happened to be the healer, so he was able to get the other party members back that did die in the crash. So that was one way that just an oddball enchanted item that they found and never really used came into play at a critical point in that particular campaign. It was really priceless. I'll never forget that adventure. Okay, so going back to my comparisons here. So I've talked about the magic system all the way down to magic items. One last thing to talk about, and that is the super powerful magic items, which in D&D are referred to as artifacts. And in Shadow of the Demon Lord, they're referred to as relics. So for the most part, they're basically the same thing. These are uber powerful, unique items that were created specifically for some entity or by some entity. And they're unique, so there's no other thing like them, unless, of course, it says there are. And then these are the infamous items that there's Eye of Vecna, Hand of Vecna, the I can't really think of any off the top of my head, but the artifacts that we're all familiar with in D&D that have stories associated with them, and that's what differentiates magic items and enchanted items from artifacts and relics, is that there's a story behind them that typically is a campaign-altering event, creature, or situation that involves the relic being included into the campaign, or the artifact being included. So the mechanical differences between the two are obviously based on the system. So D&D artifacts typically have either spells associated with them or magical qualities that make sense in D&D, whereas Shadow of the Demon Lord, there are typically spell effects or magical things associated that make sense for Shadow of the Demon Lord. But the point of artifacts and relics is that they should be significant to the story of your campaign. One of my favorite relics in Shadow of the Demon Lord is the Sword of Unmaking, which I've used in my first campaign. I used the Sword of Unmaking. So this is the Sword of Unmaking here. Many believe the Demon Lord sent the dreaded Sword of Unmaking as a curse on humanity, for woe and death follow in its wake. This great sword's black blade is set with crimson jewels, close inspection of which reveals they hold the tiny images of people inside them, the souls of those the sword has devoured. So this is essentially Stormbringer. And this is a great weapon, but there are others. The Book of Whispers, which has a desiccated tongue nailed to the blackened cover of this sinister tome. Leafing through its pages reveals strange, writhing text that surround obscene illustrations conjured from the fantasies of an unhinged mind. One with sufficient force of will might coax forth strange power from its writings. And so, that might be compared to the Book of Vile Darkness in D&D. Circlet of Eyes, Floating Skull of Urash, and Sword of Unmaking. Those are the relics that are provided in the core rulebook, and of course other supplements have other relics as well. So yeah, that is how the relics and artifacts compare to each other from Shadow the Demon Lord to D&D. All right, so that pretty much wraps up my comparison of magic systems, and hope this makes sense. Is one better than the other? Not really. They're both good systems. I already told you my hesitation with both systems. Yeah, I mean, they work. Now, are they what I would prefer? No. I don't think the magic system that I would prefer has been invented yet. If I had the mind to sit down and create a magic system, I would create a magic system that is not codified in spells. In other words, you would create magical effects on the fly, and you would use something like mana points to add effects to whatever magic you're trying to summon. So if I wanted to cast an attack spell on a creature, I would say, okay, I'm going to use 5 mana points, and for that I can do 3 dice of damage, and then I want to add, for the last 2 mana points, I want to add an effect that causes that creature to be dazed for a round, or 2 rounds, or whatever. That's the system I want to see created in some game. I have, if I had time and the inclination to do so, I might try to create some system like that myself someday. But I'm lazy, so probably not going to happen. And by the time I do have time and the inclination to do it, I'll probably be old and sitting in an old folks' home playing D&D with all the old fuckers in that home. Because that's how I roll. I'm going to teach these fuckers how to play D&D, whether they like it or not. Put your teeth in, Earl. You're going to play an elf and kill monsters and take their shit. So anyway, that's it for this this video, number 91, Shadow the Demon Lord Talk. I appreciate you hanging in there and watching. I don't know how long this video is, but it's probably longer than I wanted. And this may also wrap up my series, unless I think of another thing to compare D&D to Shadow the Demon Lord. I think I've captured just about all that I wanted to capture in this series. So, but I may change my mind, so don't hold me to that. So at any rate, thanks for watching. Hail to the Demon Lord, and I will catch you in my next video. All right, how do I turn this damn thing off? There we go.